It's interesting what you just said, Richard. You know, Jan and Innovatrix, what they just presented is very similar to what we do at MyTech in terms of having an onboarding solution for customers. But what I wanted to spend today really is looking at what we spend a lot of our time is looking at the attack vectors that fraudsters are using, the techniques that they're using to actually create these synthetic IDs. And by understanding these techniques, we really get to the point of being able to provide the authentication techniques that are required to catch these guys. So let me start with that. And if you think about, you know, human beings in general and why fraudsters are so successful, is that we as a group, we default to the truth, right? By nature, we're very trusting, not only of people, but everything else around them. But the technologies that we build are also built in a similar way, where we want to let as many people through our system, right? And try to capture the ones that are doing something that are ominous. But the reality is that if it wasn't this way, you know, imagine a world where if we didn't trust anybody and tried to live in that world, that'd be a very, very difficult proposition. So Malcolm Gladwell, there's a book that he just wrote last year called Talking to Strangers. And if you guys haven't read it, I would really recommend it. Really goes deeper into this idea. And by using this as a basis, it really gives us an opportunity to think about why fraudsters really get through our systems. So let me tell you a story about this family here. So you have Erica, and she's got two kids. She's got Leo, and she's got Ronaldo here, and their cat Felix. And you know, Leo, the little one, he loves to play soccer. He's out there. He's got this Argentina T-shirt on. You know, he's about 8, 9 years old, and he's already a magician playing soccer. Whereas Roberto here, he's really more cerebral. He loves to read. He loves to write. He's already doing like pretty high level math, etc. And then Felix, the cat, is really kind of rounds out their family. Now, what I would challenge you in the audience is to tell me which one of these is a fake, okay? All right, I think you've got a minute to do that, and let's go forward. The reality is that these are all synthetics. So the first time I came across this, there's a website called This Person Does Not Exist. Every 2 seconds, they are putting out a photo of an individual that has never existed. So they have two algorithms that are running. They're called GANs, generative adversarial networks. The first one has been taught to create a photo of a person and even a cat in this instance. The second one is taught to actually critique the first engine. And over the last, let's say, I would say the last 4 or 5 years, they've gotten much, much better where these images that you're seeing, they're so real. The first time when I saw them, I was just taken aback as to how realistic these photos are. And these are, you know, some of the things, some of the techniques that could be available to fraudsters. So by the way, it's NVIDIA has these algorithms that potentially, if you know, for people that are in the audience that are much more technically astute than I am, they can actually play around these algorithms to see what they can create. But then you ask yourself, hey, it's only a single photo. What's the big deal, right? Well, arguably, this is one of the most famous paintings in the world, the Mona Lisa. And Igor Zakharov, he took this photo and he played around with it to look at, well, and imagine if this photo could talk to us and tell us a little bit about the painter, you know, the famous Leonardo da Vinci. What would that look like? What would the techniques be involved to take this and make this into a living portrait? And so what you see on the left here is kind of that output that he created. And again, these are AI machine learning algorithms that he used or just commercially available to make this happen. And so, you know, these are some of the techniques that the high sophisticated rings can use to kind of create, let's say, IDs, synthetic IDs, and try to pass them through our system. But they're not limited to that. I think John previously in his session, he also talked about some of the things that happen on the face side. So for example, people can go out to your Facebook site and just take your printed photo and try to use that to get into your account potentially, or use that to create an ID to try to set up a new bank account or other accounts. But given that what's happening today, you know, you could take the photo, we've seen these are all things that we see in our traffic, and we need to build our systems to kind of catch them. So here you've got a 2D mask where the eyes are just been cut out. With the advent of 3D printing, you know, it's not far-fetched to actually print some of these masks at home. For a few $100s, you can actually just send a photo out and have a 3D mask returned to you home, you know, using Amazon even. Additionally, what you'll also see is that the fraudsters will attach themselves to either, if you're at a coffee shop with, obviously in this day and age, most people aren't roaming around the coffee shops, but they'll videotape you while you're either on your screen, or sometimes they'll attach themselves, especially in public Wi-Fi networks, they'll attach themselves and get a video of you. And so these are all the different techniques and ways that they will use to try to confuse the systems that are out there. And then when you look at the document itself, right, there are various points that we see. We at MyTech, we have not only agents, you know, manual people that are actually watching the system, and we have an automated system, and we return a result within, let's say, 5 to 7 seconds from getting a document and comparing it to the photo to the selfie and doing liveness on it. But we also have agents that are periodically monitoring the system to see where these attacks are coming from. So we see a lot of attacks that are on the bio data, where the name or the address has been modified to kind of open up a new account. There's a lot of attacks on the portrait zone where the photo has been replaced, and with all the different techniques that are available today, you know, from photoshopping, et cetera, and even lamination techniques, we see a lot of, those are the two primary areas that we see a lot of attacks on. In the US, we have what's called the barcode, PDF-14 barcode reader, where the bio data that's in the front is also enabled or hidden in the back through the barcode. We also see manipulations of the signature, the actual structure, and then if you're in the EU, you know, obviously there's NFC, the near field communication chip, which is an RFID tag that's predominantly now coming out, not only on driver's licenses and resident permits, but I would say close to 60, 65, 70% of passports also have a NFC chip on it as well. So these are the different areas that we see attacks coming in from. Additionally, the very sophisticated fraudsters, what they do is they will create what we call a digital breadcrumb. They will create a LinkedIn account for a synthetic ID. So they'll use the techniques that I just talked about to create, let's say, a driver's license here in the US to open up a bank account. And then they'll create for this individual an email address, which they'll use. And they'll create, let's say, a LinkedIn account or Twitter account to make and feel, look like that this is a real person. And once all of that is in place, also there's another thing that I think everybody's aware of. There's been so many data breaches where I would venture a guess that most of our data, our personal data, PII data, is somewhat available on the internet. And there are rings you can buy information from. So they would use that information and use the techniques that we just talked about to create a synthetic ID, and then try to pass the synthetic ID through the system. Then the question that I always get is, well, how do they actually do that? I get it; these are all techniques. I get it that, you know, the sophisticated fraudster rings have this available to them. Now, that's not just limited to the sophisticated fraudsters. What we see here in the US is that individuals that are immigrants or thin file clients, customers that do not have a credit history just yet, they will try to adopt some of these techniques to open up accounts. And they generally are actually, you know, they're synthetic IDs, but they generally are good synthetics because they actually want to develop a credit history and they continue paying. So there's a dichotomy there. But the question that I still get asked is, well, how do they do it? How do they create an account, get into the system? And it really starts off by, let's say in this case, we have a fraudster, we'll call her Mary. As I mentioned before, you know, a lot of our data, especially here in the US, there are rings that you can buy this information from. There are, when we file our taxes, people get their application stolen. So you can get what's here in the US as a social security number. I think there's an equivalent, let's say in the UK and then in other geos. But here, the social security number ties you to the individual and it's issued by the government. So they basically steal the social security number and then they create a synthetic ID. In this case, let's call the synthetic ID Jack Sparrow. Again, using the techniques that I just showed you. They'll go out and create this synthetic ID. And then the first thing that they'll do is they'll apply for a credit card or they'll try to open up an account in the banking system. And what happens here is very interesting, is that they get rejected. They don't get rejected for the case that, oh, this is a synthetic ID, this is a false ID. No, they get rejected because this unique combination of the social security number with maybe a modified digit and this new synthetic ID has never been seen before in the system. So what magically happens here and also elsewhere in the world is really a new file is created for this individual. So they're rejected, but then a thin file is created for them saying, okay, yes, this guy, this individual, Jack Sparrow, applied for a credit card, but he'd never existed in our system. Obviously, you know, maybe they'll use the age. Oh, this is obviously a young person trying to get in, or maybe it looks like, it feels like an immigrant that's gotten in, and magically a file is created for them. Once this file is created for them, they go out and attack as many channels as they can, because now they look like a legit user. So what we've seen in our systems, again, going back to what I was talking about, we have agents that are actually constantly monitoring the system. We'll see these types of attacks where on a new credit card opening, within a very short time period, let's say 5 days, we'll see attack for 30, 40, 50 attempts using the same ID. Maybe there'll be a modification of the address, slight modification of the name, or just different little tweaks. They're just experimenting on our systems to try to get in and open up a new account. So the good news is that 99% of the customers that we'll see are really good customers. In other words, they're not the fraudsters. They're not the ones that are trying to attack our systems. They are actually good people. These are individuals that we want to have open up an account, whether it's for the marketplace, whether it's for a credit card, whether it's for a loan, etc. And so doing some kind of analysis and looking at kind of the different types of attacks that we see, obviously for new account, loan products, anything that's related to direct access to money, you see a lot more fraud occurring there. If it's, let's say, a marketplace account where maybe it's a product or a service that's being traded, you see less fraudulent activity there. But overall, we're talking about this fraud area is around 1% of kind of the total that we see. Now, what we recommend when you're going through what we call the identity proofing funnel, there are different areas of checks that you can perform. Now, depending on if you're doing a financial institution or if you're dealing with a fintech, et cetera, you really want to capture their ID and do a liveness and selfie to photo comparison. Again, our solution is in the red. And today on the automated system, we do both of those things in less than 7 to 8 seconds. We also can take that information and also feed it to an agent, where generally it'll take 2 to 2.5 minutes. And the agent has AI assisted mechanism to be able to tell you whether or not that particular document is fraudulent. Liveness and obviously face comparison, those are done using machine learning AI algorithms. Now, as I mentioned previously with these breadcrumbs, you can also do name checks, date of birth checks, emails checks, social checks. What you're doing is, the more checks you perform, the more trust that you're getting that this individual is who they say they are. So typically, especially in the financial institution, we see that you'll see a lot more verifications that are being done all the way through. Whereas if you're in the marketplace, sometimes the marketplace, you may see, let's say, an email check done first before you do an ID check. So these things can move around. And so when we look at, I'm just going to build this out, it'd be easier. Today's defenses, we really have to understand both identity and fraud, that they're intertwined throughout the customer journey. And we find that companies from different industries have really a better idea how to defend their customers, their platforms and their brands based on these attacks that we're seeing. Today, you don't see a lot of crossover between the financial and then the online marketplaces. What we're in the middle of developing is a consortia where we bring these types of partners together to be able to share the techniques that the fraudsters are using. It's in all of our best interest to understand the technique that fraudsters are using and then be able to help clients to successfully onboard individuals that they want to. And as I mentioned, a lot of the data is out there stolen. So doing what's called KBA, knowledge-based authentication or one-time passports, they're less reliable than they used to be. And then essentially, we have to figure out a way just to connect all this information, not just being a point solution, but really look at through the customer journey throughout the life cycle of what happens to this individual when you onboard them. Because the reality is this, right? When you onboard an individual, they don't necessarily commit fraud at that time period. Fraud commits somewhere down the road, 6 months, 9 months down the road. What I didn't mention is in the previous example that I was showing you, how an individual can go in and create synthetic ID and get an account open. Typically, what we see in the big rings, let's say 9 months out, 9 to 15 months out, they'll walk away with $200,000 to $300,000 to $400,000. The big rings that we've looked at, they walked away with $2.5 million over 15 months, and that was one ring, that was one attack, and they had multiple attacks where they walked away with $200,000, $300,000, $500,000 worth of cash, and they become victimless crimes because if you think about it, there's nobody there to go and prosecute on the back end because they walked away with the money and they've disappeared. So Richard, with that, I give it back to you.